Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Totalbiscuit. Game not functioning as it should? Well, that's appropriate. Buy our season pass. Welcome to Arkham Knight. And what a depressing welcome it is. What a depressing welcome indeed. This is the port report for this game. And these are my technical experiences with it so far. Oh my. So, Arkham Knight, of course, is the fourth game in the Arkham series. We don't count Blackgate because it's terrible. And it was developed by Rocksteady, which was, in the eyes of many, an indication that this game would be a return to form after Origins let some people down. That was not developed by Rocksteady, by the way. However, we had people who were saying, oh, well, it's going to be great. You know, there's definitely not going to be any problems here because the Rocksteady developed games were great on PC. Revisionist history, in effect, there. I mean, not only was Origins, which was not Rocksteady developed, it was actually ported by Iron Galaxy, who is incidentally the same company responsible for porting this game to PC, not running all that well, but it had a bunch of game-breaking bugs, some of which were never fixed because they moved on to messing around with DLC as opposed to actually fixing the game. But the thing that a lot of people seem to gloss over is that Arkham City also had significant issues. Not only did it have performance issues on launch with DirectX 11, but it also suffered from a game-breaking bug which would delete your saved games. That's not too great, is it? No, 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 no. I don't know why people don't remember this. It's probably because they bought the Game of the Year edition like a year on when those problems had actually been ironed out. But the Arkham games have historically had problems on launch on PC, and anyone that tells you otherwise didn't buy them at launch. It is that simple. Arkham Knight may be the worst of the lot in that regard. Now, before I go on, I'd like to disclaim this and say, I am maybe on the luckiest edge of this. The problems that I've had are in no way as terrible as some of the problems that many other people have had. So if you watch this video and you say, oh, this seems to be running okay, bear a few things in mind. One, I got lucky. For the most part, this game is running alright, and I say alright. It is by no means running anywhere near as well as it should on hardware like this. And secondly, the hardware I'm running it on is ridiculous, and is not representative of the vast majority of PC gamers. Meaning that if you are not running things like Titan X, or an overclocked hexa-core Intel latest gen processor, or a lot of fast SSDs and really fast DDR4 RAM, if you're not running any of those things, then your experience is most likely going to suck. At least in its current form. If you're coming across this video later on in the game's lifespan, it's possible that all this stuff has been fixed, and I suggest you go and do a little bit of research. This is the launch version. A day on, there's been no sign of a fix whatsoever as of yet. Okay, so I'm going to show you some gameplay footage, and that's going to give you an indication of what's going on, some of the problems. And I only say some because I haven't experienced anywhere near as many as a lot of other people. And that means, by the way, you should listen to them rather than me. You know, if a lot of people are shouting for the rooftops and saying this game is broken, and then someone with a pretty good PC comes along and says, well, I mean, it's not as broken, then listen to the crowd. Don't listen to me. As I said, I got lucky. I'm also going to show you the benchmarking tool, which is in no way representative of the game, the way the game actually works, but it does demonstrate quite nicely how broken SLI is in this game, plus the difference in performance between 1080p and 1440p. And we're going to have a look first at the options menu, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. Okay, so let's start with the glaring things that are missing. This is a very small options menu compared to the other Arkham games, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, things that are missing. Let's begin with proper anti-aliasing options. On and off? Are you serious? I mean, not only do most games allow for multiple forms of anti-aliasing, things like FXAA, MFAA, MSAA, SSAA, that sort of thing, but they also allow different levels of it. 2x, 4x, 8x, that sort of thing. And that option is nice, because a lot of people don't like FXAA, because it looks like you've put Vaseline on your screen. I don't know what kind of anti-aliasing this game uses, because it doesn't tell you, so enjoy that. It claims it's a high-quality full-screen anti-aliasing effect. What kind of anti-aliasing effect? Is it FSAA? I don't even know. I don't have a clue. Not a clue. You know, for an NVIDIA-optimized game, I don't know if NVIDIA got much of a chance to get their hands on this, because if they took one look at this options menu, they should have said, hang on a minute, there's a lot missing here. I mean, compare this to Far Cry 4's options menu. This is not even close. This is archaic. Texture resolution, low and normal. Whoop. low, medium, and high shadow quality, low, medium, and high level of detail, and then 4 GameWorks options, which you're probably going to want to turn off if you run on AMD. Now, in my experience, these GameWorks settings have not significantly affected the performance of this game, and by that I mean to say it doesn't run great regardless of whether these are on or off. There are, of course, some frame drops with things like enhanced smoke and rain and light shafts, of course there are, but they're not actually that noticeable compared to the bigger performance problems this game actually has. What else is missing? Where is anisotropic filtering? You know, that essential thing that almost every open world game, in fact, most action games have these days, because it does a fantastic job of adding more detail and smoothing things out at distance, which you would need in a game like this. Surely you'd need that. And of course, it has almost no impact on performance. Where's that? Oh, that's scurried away in the INI files. It's not in the options menu. Why? That's bonkers. That's absolutely bonkers. Well, at least they allow for Ultra HD resolutions. You go up the way up to 4K here if you want, as you can see. That's actually 4K, that isn't. There you go. Can do that if you so desire. Most of the footage I'm going to show you is 1080p, although I do have some 1440p just to show you a little bit of performance, but the video will be in 1080p. Just bear that in mind. Okay, then you got your full screen, windowed, no border, and window with border. At least they managed to put that in. Okay. Outside of that, what else is missing? An option to turn off mouse smoothing would be nice. You want to do that? Dive into the INI files. Once again, that essential option, not here. Mouse sensitivity, not here. Because of course it isn't. Why would you include something like that? Outside of that, at least they've got most of what you need. It would be nice to get camera control in such a way that you could pull the camera back a little bit, because they get a little bit close at times over the shoulder there, but nope, you won't be getting anything like that. Audio options are, thankfully, as you would expect, separate sliders for the various kinds of volume, speaker settings, and subtitles. Good, good. And then you have keyboard controls, which are fully rebindable with alternate functionality, which is actually pretty good. You know, this is quite nice, I've got to admit here. You even have quick fire buttons, so if you don't want to double or triple tap the buttons in order to activate certain gadgets quickly, then you can assign them separate keys. And each gadget has its own hotkey assigned, which is nice. You don't have to deal with a wheel or anything like that. So this is okay. I don't really have too many complaints about this. I know a lot of people play this with a pad, so they're not really concerned about this. But speaking of pad, you want to see something a little bit unusual for PC? That. DualShock 4. Well, of course, DualShock 4s do work with PC, but we're used to having Xbox 360 and Xbox One native support. This defaults to DualShock 4. I have to wonder if that indicates what platform this was ported from. But that's a little bit unusual, and I would say that the majority of PC gamers do not own a DualShock 4. They own an Xbox 360 or Xbox One controller, because that has been the standard on PC for years. So why this is the default, I couldn't say, and that is very, very silly. Okay, so before we dive into the performance test, which I must again remind you is not indicative of in-game performance, but it will give you some ideas as to what's going on, I must address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the fact that this game by default is locked at 30 frames per second. Now you might of course notice that my frame rate's a little bit higher than that. That's because I dived into the .ini files and I unlocked the frame rate. Against the recommendation of Rocksteady that posted the recommended system requirements for this game, claimed that they were going on to try and fix the problems that the PC version had, and also mentioned that the recommended system requirements were for 30 frames per second, not 60. Now, I'm going to say this until I'm blue in the face. I'm going to say it over and over again, and I've been saying it for years, and I'm going to keep saying it, and I don't care how sick people are getting of it, because it needs to happen. 60 FPS for PC is standard. Anything lower than that is subpar and is unsuitable for PC gaming. It is. It really is. If you have powerful enough hardware, you should be running 60 FPS minimum. The difference in gameplay quality, as well as visual fidelity, is astounding. There is no doubt about that. There's a reason I don't play consoles these days, because most games on console run at 30 frames per second, and I'm sorry, I'm too used to 60. It's more responsive, it's more fluid, it's better in every way. There is no game on this planet that does not benefit from 60 frames per second. Even Hearthstone plays better at 60 frames per second, and anyone that's played it on their iPad versus playing it on a PC will tell you this. There is no way in a million years that it is acceptable for a AAA game in 2015 to be locked to 30 frames per second. That is ridiculous. Absolutely absurd. And they know better. Bear in mind that, of course, all of the other Arkham games, including Blackgate, which sucked, but regardless, including Blackgate, ran at 60 frames per second, not 30. As to why this is bound to 30, I couldn't say. Now, the problem with unlocking it is, one, maintaining it, even on monster hardware, is very difficult, as you will find out. Secondly, the game becomes unstable beyond 30 frames per second, and many people have reported crashes and a wide variety of physics-based bugs. As to whether or not those will ever be fixed, that's a mystery. If they decided to tie too many of the game's functions to the frame rate, then we could have a permanently broken game. Now, my experience of the game at 60 FPS, assuming it stays at 60 FPS up to this point, has had minor physics bugs, nothing really that's been game-breaking. I've noticed a couple of little problems here and there, but I can still play the game without too much of a problem. I mean, if I was locked at 30, I just wouldn't play it at all. It's really that simple. It's absolute hot rubbish. There's no way. Absolutely no way. But the fact that the recommended system requirements are for 30 is ridiculous. Rocksteady should know better than this. Iron Galaxy and Warner Brothers should know better than this. Who is responsible? I don't know. I'm not going to assign blame because that would be pure speculation at this point. It really would. But this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, the first Warner Brothers published PC port that has had problems. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we show you some gameplay. Okay, there we go. Without further ado, I'm going to dive into some PC performance tests. I'm going to talk a little bit about the benchmarking, and then we're going to show you some real-world gameplay, and I'll talk about some of the problems that I have experienced, as well as share some of the problems that have been experienced by other people. Because, as I said before, I got lucky. A lot of people didn't. Alright, let's dive into this. Okay, first things first. Let's talk a little bit about these benchmarks here. So, I'm running a couple of different benchmarks, 1080p, 1440p, and then 1440p with 2 graphics cards enabled. And you might think, well, that should improve things. Oh, you poor sweet summer child. Okay, no. SLI is busted in this game. Busted. It makes the game run worse. I couldn't explain that to you for the life of me, but it does. That's ludicrous. I mean, the worst that I've usually seen with SLI is it's just had no effect. But they managed to somehow make it run worse. And you'll be able to see it when I show you the comparison here between the SLI version and the non-SLI version. Now, at 1080p on Titan X, the game claims to stay above 60 FPS. Claims. And honestly, this looks okay. I mean, this is with all of the NVIDIA effects on, everything's turned up to maximum. This looks like it's running fine. It looks smooth, and everything is peachy. Maybe not as high frame rate as you would want, certainly not as high frame rate as I would want from a card like this, but it's smooth, and that's the main thing. Here's the problem. That is not how the game actually performs. I wish I could say that it was, but this is in no way a reflection of the real-world performance, and there are loads of problems with that. Alright, let's get into some real-world gameplay. This is at 1440p on 1 GPU, not 2. It might claim it's running on 2, it's not. For some reason, Riva Tuner and MSI Afterburner do not give you the proper GPU readouts in this game. I don't know why that is, but it is the case. The frame rate, though, is very accurate, and you can see it going all over the place. You might be thinking, well, it's because you're running it at such a high resolution. That's actually not true. I would love to claim that that were the case, but unfortunately it is not, because while, yes, 1080p will give you higher frame rate, especially if you happen to be on the ground, in the air, that's where a lot of the problems arise, and also while you're driving. Now, I have not got the worst end of this. Some people have reported that the Batmobile sections are almost unplayable, and I've seen the video evidence that indicates it. Here, let me just show you. This is from a YouTube user that got in the Batmobile for the first time, and this is what happened. Yeah. Completely freezes up. Huge frame drops, massive hangs. Now, I haven't had that, but I have had the frame drops, and one has to wonder if it's got something to do with the speed at which you're moving, because if you're running around on the ground at ground level, the game is probably running fine. As soon as you get into the air, or into the car, as in the two means of getting around the city, that's when you're gonna start to run into problems. Now, I have not experienced a huge amount of hitching. I think I'm quite fortunate. It may be because I have a fast SSD, and fast RAM, fast CPU, and all that sort of stuff. You know, I'm running a high-end PC, that's probably mitigating quite a lot of it. But people who are running on standard hard drives, well, they're running into all sorts of problems, and that was indeed acknowledged in the post by Rocksteady themselves. Here is a quote directly from their article. "We're currently working on improving streaming performance from mechanical hard drives. Addressing this is one of our top short-term priorities. For users that have an SSD available, we've noted increased streaming performance when the game is installed to that type of drive." That means it is possible that, as the game streams in content, that things like mechanical hard drives are causing the game to slow down and hitch. It's possible, and it may be that SSDs will to some degree alleviate that. And that seems to be the case with me. I've not had much hitching, but I've had some. Not these big multi-second freezes that others have had, but I've definitely had big frame rate drops and occasional hitching, especially when driving fast or flying quickly across the city. It reminded me quite a lot of Far Cry 4 at launch, although in some cases it's actually a little bit worse. Now, as you can see from the footage on the screen, there are frequent frame rate drops. And it's usually while moving fast, as I mentioned. But this is nowhere near as bad as other people are suffering. So I'd like to quote a few people and let you know what they're running on. So this is a quote from a Steam user that was running on a GTX 970. And he says this: "When I hop into the Batmobile or start gliding around, frame rate will start dropping, anywhere from 50s down to the low 20s. The worst part is every now and again the frame rate would tank so hard it would go down to single digits, like several other people have noticed. Right now, it is impossible to maintain a stable 60 or even 30 FPS. Here's one from another 970 user on Steam. The game will frequently pause or dip to sub 10 FPS on a GTX 970 when entering or approaching new areas. Cutscenes have similar issues to Witcher 3 in that while in engine they run at even less FPS, by default the game itself is locked to 30, tweakable by the INI files, than the normal game, making them stutter or appear stilted. Summoning the Batmobile causes major frame drops. At one point, I summoned the car to try the Batmobile takedown move. By the time the frame rate recovered, the Batmobile had crushed the pack of guys I was fighting, including the Riddler henchman I wanted to interrogate." Now, I have not personally experienced these frame drops during cutscenes. I imagine, again, probably something to do with SSD. And I guess that because cutscenes often have content loading in the background. This is pretty commonplace for most modern games. So if I were to speculate, and that is really all I'm doing at the moment, it may be that the slower your drive is, the more problems you have with this. I have a very fast SSD, so I maybe don't suffer that as much, but that does not mean that people are not suffering that issue. Some people have it even worse on the 970, which is a pretty good card. I'm running this game at 720p, says another user, and low shadows, with an i5 4690K and a Gigabyte 970 OC. It stutters like hell, looks awful, and frame rate drops everywhere. Maybe you'd like to hear from an AMD user. We can do that. This guy has a Sapphire 280X with 3 gigs of video RAM. And again, he is reporting sometimes frame rates hit single digits, and I'm pretty sure that's not right. You are correct, it is not right at all. Another AMD user reports getting 30 FPS max on low settings, turning the camera drops to 10, cinematics running at 5 frames per second, crashing, game re-downloading, and installing nothing but a headache so far, and things go on and on and on for thousands and thousands of user reviews. Good Lord in heaven. I certainly consider myself a little bit fortunate here, because I haven't experienced as many problems as these guys, but I certainly feel for them. That is ridiculous. Alright, let's talk a little bit about what I have observed. Well, I have initially observed fairly poor texture quality. You know what I'm like, I'm a stickler for that kind of thing, and I will go out of my way to look for gnarly texture work, and the game has plenty of that. Driving around in the Batmobile slowly, in first person, will give you a great indication of it, since it's a little bit more difficult to get that sort of view in third person. Things like wall textures are fairly low resolution, and a lot of it is obfuscated by things like rain and fancy lighting effects, which I must admit, especially with the NVIDIA GameWorks effects, do look pretty good. However, the general quality level of the textures really isn't there. And if it was just things like walls and cars and debris, then I'd probably give it a pass. I give it something of a pass anyway, because open world games generally have a lot of textures to deal with, and as a result, the overall quality of each texture is often much lower, but it is worth criticizing nonetheless, especially when we are supposed to be looking at the latest and greatest, a big budget AAA game on a powerful system. You're moving past all that. It's not really a big deal. You're moving at high speed, you're gliding over it, you don't see that kind of stuff. But what you do see is the poor quality textures on the models. I was very surprised to see things like the Batsuit suffering from low resolution texture work. You would think that the main character would be something of a priority there, but it would appear that that is not the case, and it doesn't look that great. If you look closely, then you will start to see lots of pixelation and lower quality work than you would have expected from a title like this. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. That's the sort of thing that I can look over in an open world game and say, alright, okay, I'll deal with it. And let's be honest, I'm being picky because it's my job to be picky. Most people are not going to care about that. What they might care about, however, is the fact that certain features, graphical features, are missing from the PC version of this game. Why, you might ask? I've certainly got no answer for you, but I can tell you this for sure. There is no ambient occlusion in the game. It's gone. We don't know why. Also, depth of field. There's very little of that. And when it comes to rain, oh, moisture on surfaces, lots of stuff missing there. The transparency layer is gone, and the rain which is supposed to accumulate on Batman and on the Batmobile is missing for some reason. The very notion that effects would be missing from the PC version that are in the PlayStation 4 version is so mind-numbingly ridiculous that my only explanations for it fall into one of two possible categories: incompetence or lack of time. Both of those are a possibility. Perhaps even both of them simultaneously when it comes to the port on PC. Now, speaking of missing, several people have also reported that textures don't stream properly. This is most likely an issue with those running mechanical hard drives. I personally have not seen it, but then again, maybe I just haven't got far enough into the game yet. But plenty of people have said a lot of textures just don't load properly. I just want to point out, by the way, this is on the Unreal Engine 3. This is an engine that's pretty much been mastered at this point. There is no excuse for messing up Unreal 3 in 2015. That is absurd. Unreal 3 has been around since 2004. I think, at least I would like to think, that developers should have got a handle on it by now. I mean, for God's sake, this engine is more than one console generation old and it's still around and kicking. Now, what you've seen on the screen today is a demonstration of perhaps the best case scenario with this game. This game running reasonably well. And I say reasonably because under no circumstances should this level of performance actually be acceptable on a machine like this, but it's a hell of a lot better than what other people are having to endure. Most people, you're not going to get anything close to this. Good luck finding solid 60 FPS footage of this game on YouTube, because most people won't be able to play it like that, much less record it like that. I also apologize for the fact that this gameplay footage is going to look worse than the real game does. One, because I had to capture it with Shadowplay, which is a lossy capture software, and the reason I had to do that is because performance was so bad that capturing it with anything more hardcore was going to result in huge frame drops. And, of course, because you can't turn off motion blur. No, you can't. Yeah, that might be blowing your mind here. Motion blur often makes video look really terrible on YouTube, especially at 60 frames per second. It causes all sorts of artifacting and just muddy visual quality in general. You can't turn it off. If you try and turn it off, it crashes the game. That's when you modify the .ini file, so just enjoy that. You are forced to play with it. There's a little bit of a workaround, but it's not perfect. And that's just another thing in a long list of troubles with this title. Is it the worst PC port we've had in a while? Yes. I mean, is it Unity level bad? Yes, at least in my view, but then again, as I said, I got relatively lucky. For a lot of people, this is worse than Assassin's Creed Unity ran on launch, and that is saying a lot because that game was a disaster. This one, also terrible. There is, in my opinion, no circumstance at all in which a GTX 980 should be recommended for ultra system requirements at 30 frames per second. There is no circumstance where you should require an i7-3770 and a GTX 760 with 3 gigs of video RAM to run this thing on recommended at 30 frames per second, or indeed minimum a GTX 660 or Radeon HD 7950. Bear in mind, the 7950 is a better card than what is in the PlayStation 4. The GTX 760 and its AMD equivalent crush current generation consoles, and as for the 980, it eats them for breakfast. There is no reason at all why the PC version of this game should not run significantly better than it does on console. For me, it does, but my PC costs as much as 10 PlayStation 4s. Under no circumstances should people have to buy something that expensive to get this thing running acceptably at 1080p. That's not even going into 4K and stuff like that. And for God's sake, even people with GTX 980s and the AMD equivalent are reporting problems and hitching and huge frame rate drops. I mean, you saw it in the video. I'm getting them as well. I don't think there's anybody who's not. It's possible if you happen to be the winner of roulette when it comes to your hardware configuration, but you can never necessarily trust when people said, it's just running fine for me, I don't see the problem, on the internet, because some of them are trolling, and some people don't know what the hell they're talking about. For some people, 30 frames per second or lower is fine. But show me the benchmarks, show me the numbers, show me the damn money. You've seen the money right here, 1080p and 1440p footage. Not to mention the nonsense with SLI. It's balked. It's simple as that. It is balked. Even in its current state on my machine, let's just assume for a second that everyone's ran like mine, I still wouldn't recommend it. Running on somebody else's, at lower spec, not in a million years. This is going to require a huge amount of patching. Under no circumstances should anything be released in this state in 2015 on PC. And yet it was. Who dropped the ball? Was it Iron Galaxy, Rocksteady, Warner Brothers? Probably a combination of all three. It ultimately doesn't matter. What matters is your ability to get a refund for this if you're unfortunate enough to be suffering problems having bought it on day one. The Steam refund system is there for a reason, and even Green Man Gaming, that is a third-party reseller, says that after the first patch, if the game is not satisfactory, they will refund. They're not doing it now, though. I would strongly suggest that you exercise your right to refund this game if it does not run properly for you. That sends a message. And please, 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 and I'm not telling you what to do with your money, but please just consider this for 1 second. Please stop pre-ordering video games. This happens over and over and over again. I need not remind you of the definition of insanity. It's a shame, because this game looks like it's pretty good, and eventually I will get around to doing a full WTF is while I actually talk about the gameplay rather than just the performance. But this is what it looks like. This is how it runs on a $5,000 system. I expect it to run worse on anything less than that. And that is not acceptable. Not at all. My name's been Totalbiscuit, taking a look at the performance of Arkham Knight on PC, the launch version. I'll see you next time.